Fiji were very solid against Australia, but we now know that Australia were a poor team. Let's not forget Wales beat them 40 points to 6. And as Warren Gatland said after Wales had beaten Australia, he said everyone went on about Fiji being unlucky not to beat us. He said, but at 60 minutes, it was 36-14. We had complete control of the game. And they did. And what Fiji did then for 20 minutes, they threw out the window all the talk about let's not give penalties away, let's minimise errors. They played like old Fiji. Now, those of us of an age know, one hand waving free, second rows doing amazing things. They did that and they blew Wales off the park. And then we watched them against Georgia and they tried to eliminate errors. After the match, they said we gave too many penalties away. They didn't say we lacked any vibrancy. Against Portugal, all the rugby just about was played by Portugal. Fiji are trying to become a European team. And I think by winning at Twickenham, it put something in their head that they can be like England and France. But to a certain extent, they don't want to be. They don't have a line out. So you can't play a foundational first phase game without a line out. You've got to do other things. And right now, I think Simon Raoului, they're very diplomatic and worldwide coach, has just got caught in a little bit of a trap. And I think Fiji have got to step back to being Fiji on Sunday if they're going to win.
Hello there, this is Stig Abel from Times Radio. We are getting to the pointy end of the Rugby World Cup. Finally, you might say. These rugby tournaments do take an awful long time to get to the really good bit, but we're here now. We've been going through it week by week by week as the tournament has progressed. No better person as ever to talk to than the man who writes in the Times, writes in the Sunday Times, a great figure in rugby, the former fly half, Stuart Barnes. We never hold that against him on this programme, as you well know. Stuart, are you excited? It's good to be here. Quarterfinals are here. There's going to be some crackers. It probably happened as we thought it would when you look at the names, but it was quite an interesting way to get here as well, wasn't it?
Yeah, it's not just about who's going to lift the World Cup at the end of the month. There are other stories. For example, probably the biggest shock in the entire tournament was the last pool game when Portugal beat Fiji. The scenes in Toulouse were fantastic. I always worry about the knee-jerk. We must now include Portugal in the Six Nations straight away. But what has happened is Portugal has been given foundations as a rugby country, and they were fantastic on the day. And sport is often, we're always saying, where does this leave us? What comes next? And sometimes we just forget the moment. And I think if you forget the moment in sport, you're getting something very wrong, because sport isn't the most serious thing in the world. It is about joy and it is about immediate misery, but a misery that doesn't last too long.
Yeah, and it's interesting because I was thinking about Italy when Portugal won, and all my lifetime, I've probably waited, not all my lifetime, but a large chunk of it. Italy have been nearly there, but not quite, haven't they? And each time there's a moment for Italy, when they went from 5 to 6 nations, it felt like Italy were coming. And, I remember Castro playing for Leicester, that great Italian prop, amazing figure. And there was a number 8, wasn't there, who was the amazing number 8 who played for Italy? Price. They've had some great players, and so you're right. That was a great game of rugby. Portugal versus Fiji. Who knew it was going to be so good? And thank goodness it was. But rugby has this way, sadly, of not always then delivering, does it? We've not seen, maybe Argentina succeeded to break in, but it feels like a very closed shop, doesn't it, rugby, generally speaking?
I think rugby is a closed shop because it is such an intensely physical sport. It's got a myriad of strange and infuriating laws. You compare that with football, and football is effectively a very simple game, and that's why it's universally loved. It's easy to play. Now they've got VAR. They can sort of say, look, he's offside or he's not offside. You can see pretty much what's happening in football. It's quite clear. Rugby is a very confusing game at times, and it could well be. that what are potentially two of the greatest games of all time in Paris this weekend won't turn out that way because of refereeing and delays and all this sort of thing. So it is a close shot, and I think it's a much harder game for a country to become good at than it is in football. And we're always talking about the American market, this slavish devotion to all things American, but they can't crack it because of the minutiae of difference between that and American football, where people just think they'll come out of collegiate football and they'll be brilliant rugby players. It ain't like that.
No. It's a bit of a digression. So I want to talk about the quarterfinals, but I was just thinking as we were having this conversation, cricket, arcane sport with lots of rules, and what they've done to become more popular is they've simplified it down. They've made it, and you end up with the ridiculousness, in my view, of sort of 10 over cricket, which you now get in places, or even the 100, which I know a lot of people do like, and I can see the value in it, but it just seems to be eventually just reducing everything to more and more simple things. And I think you do lose something when you just have a sport that's so devoted to just slogging. A lot of people disagree with that, I know, please don't at me. But they've seen a problem and they've changed it, whereas rugby's had sevens, and I'm not advocating for this at all, but it's interesting that that's never been seen as an alternative, or even the 50-man game, to say, can we cut out some of the rules? I mean, maybe they've once talked about getting rid of competed scrums because no one understands where scrum penalties come from. Are you surprised there's not been more of a sort of 2020 movement in rugby?
No, I'm not. I think there's an issue with all sports. The governance is very conservative. It's very dated and it's slow. Cricket did make that change, but it was driven by a gigantic economy. Rugby, you've got to remember, does not have an India. So when we talk about cricket and that one-day game, that's come from the subcontinent. We don't have anything like that. We're the fag end of an empire. If you look at world rugby, apart from, you take France out of the equation, it's basically countries that were once part of the colonies and part of the empire. So there is a sense of looking backwards in rugby, I think, and that's the negative. The plus side is, whilst I understand the need for entertainment in the rush to try and get television and marketing money, rugby has also held out and said, if you want a game where we don't have scrums, or scrums are a simple form of restart, you can go to rugby league. Now, you've just said you get lots of stick about that. Over the years, I've got a lot of stick about rugby league because I've always felt that union has more of a chess-like feel to it, and league is more drafts and slightly simpler. But it doesn't mean one's better than the other. But they're two different markets, and I think that rugby league in Australia and in the northern parts of England has its own market. In New Zealand as well, it's quite a strong sport. It's even growing in parts of France. So if you want something different, it's there, but it's under a different governance.
It's a really good point. I mean, the Warriors were really good this year in the NRL and for New Zealand, and there may be a mini renaissance happening there. Let's stop looking backward then, Stuart. Let's look forward. I've got the 4 games in front of me. It's a hell of a weekend of rugby union, thank God. The Premiership is starting in this country. We won't get into that, but should we go through these game by game? Because I've got the timing. So if we go in chronological order, Stuart, the first game of the quarterfinals. There's a couple. These quarterfinals split into 2 absolute corkers, with 4 amazing teams, and 2 potential middlers, with 4 not especially good teams.
Stig, do you want to stick the knife any deeper in my heart? I'm flying to Marseille, where the 4 not particularly good teams will be competed on Saturday and Sunday to cover for the Times and Sunday Times our UK-based teams. Thanks.
Yes, so I'm so sorry about that. Well, let's start. So Wales versus Argentina. The story around this is a story of, I suppose, overturned expectations to a certain extent. Before the tournament, some talk that Argentina could do something. Quite a lot of talk that Wales would do very little at all. They've had an easy draw, no question about it. But, Australia are out of it. And, Wales were down to that. Are Wales favourites in this game? What are you expecting from this game, Stuart?
Wales favourites. I expect them to win. I've been quite impressed with Wales. They play a simple game, but don't confuse that with not a potent game. Against Australia, they've only got about 4 strike moves, but against Australia in the first minute, they pulled one out of the bag, they sliced the Wallabies open, and they never looked back. It was very impressive that Sunday night in Lyon. They were very impressive against Fiji for an hour until Fiji started being Fijian, and then all hell let loose. They have a simplified game under Gatland, but it functions because all the players know what they're doing. Unlike England, it's quite a dynamic game. Unlike England, I think you could say, by coming with a fresh captain in Jack Morgan, they've got a new leader who has inspired them. And in Louis Rees-Zammit, they have a finisher who they trust to give ball and he will score tries. Now that makes that there are 3 potentially great teams in the other half of the draw, and New Zealand, who on their day can beat anyone. So I'm not saying Wales will win, but I think Wales have put themselves in a great position to get in the semis. As for Argentina, I think I said to you, I fancied they'd beat England, but only on the back of England's ineptitude. I did keep telling people that Argentina were not a great team, that they were nowhere near the old Pumas side. And so it has passed in this World Cup. Their problem is they don't have a powerful pack. And without the pack, they're playing some quite pretty rugby, but they're dancing sideways and backwards. Wales are very aggressive in the midfield. I think they'll put them under pressure. I think for Argentina, if they're going to win, then one of my favourite Premiership players, Santiago Carreras, might have to move back to full-back from fly half, where he's been very good until this tournament. And they go Nicolas Sanchez, who's been a brilliant game controlling 10. I think Argentina need to play a little less rugby and a little more territory, and Sanchez gives them that. And I think that's their main hope, but I would say Wales are fairly strong and deserved favourites to make the semis.
And if you had to say the most important player on the pitch in that game, name one.
I think Morgan has driven Wales, and I think Sanchez is needed so badly by Argentina. Those 2, 1 from each.
So that's at 4 o'clock on Saturday, Wales, Argentina. At 8 o'clock is, well, it's hard to say if this is the game of the round because there's a France-South Africa at the end of it, but it's a really big one. Ireland versus New Zealand. I watched Ireland-Scotland, Stuart, after our conversation, saying, well, we thought Ireland were locked on to win it, but could Scotland give them a trouble? And it wasn't even a game, really. Ireland blew them off the park, Scotland. Scotland, by the end, it felt like it got away from them. There was a bit of petulance. They got a yellow card and it started to drift away from them. But before that, Ireland blew them off the park. And that was a potentially tricky game for Ireland, wasn't it? But this is a...
Sorry, carry on.
But this is, I'm going to say, this is an Ireland team that's now beaten Scotland in a game that they had to win and beaten South Africa. They were fated coming into the tournament. They're the number 1 team in the world. There is this World Cup hoodoo around them. But apart from that, it couldn't really have gone any better for Ireland this World Cup. And although New Zealand can beat anyone, you've got to imagine they're not going to beat Ireland.
The Ireland hoodoo is history, and it's irrelevant history. Under this team, Farrell has them geared up. They have to be favourites. One of the main reasons they're favourites is New Zealand is a country that has played great rugby for a long, long time, but it's also been psychologically strong. From the haka to the colour of the jersey to the silver fern. I can remember still, first time I played against the All Blacks as a kid for the South and Southwest. You run out onto the pitch thinking, well, shit, we got no chance of winning this match.
Yeah.
And through untold ages, that has been the case. And Ireland, I think they lost 27 and drew one of their first 28 games with New Zealand. So they had this problem. Then they won in Chicago, and in the ensuing 8 games, they've won 5 and lost 3. Yeah. So suddenly New Zealand, who are the arch bullies, and I mean that in a good sense, are thinking, shit, this team beat us. And Ireland, who are used to being trod over by the All Blacks, are thinking, we're better than them. And Farrell has got them believing it. And there's justification. It's not a sort of a belief based on nothing. That first half against Scotland was one of the most clinical 40 minutes of international rugby you would see. They got in the Scottish opportunity. They picked wonderful running lines. They scored. Scotland came back. Scotland knew they had to throw everything at them early. They had 10 minutes of pressure. Ireland just absorbed it all. They got upfield again. They scored another great try. 31-0 at half time. And you just thought, forget about number one because of the World Rugby rankings. They were the number one team because that was a bruising and brutal performance.
Yeah.
And if New Zealand are going to beat them, New Zealand are going to have to do what they've been able to do against weaker teams in their pool, which is keep turning over possession. If New Zealand get turnover, that moment when the other team attacking becomes defence, they're the best in the world because technically they've got backs. You look at Will Jordan; he can throw a pass as well as any outside half in the middle of the field, and outside halves can play on the wing. They're so gifted. But against Ireland, they're going to get squeezed unless they can get that killer ball that it's so hard to defend against. Because I think Ireland can defend against anyone. They showed that against South Africa. You mustn't forget 13-8, South Africa, world champions, playing really well. One try. Ireland know how to stop teams and they know how to score, and nothing between their head is going to stop them. The only thing that will stop them, I think, is New Zealand finding a way to dominate the turnovers. And we're waiting to see whether Ian Foster, the All Black manager, will recall their captain, Sam Cane, because Sam Cane has been a weakness in their team. There's a sort of trust and a loyalty to the skipper. As a human level, it's quite touching. In sport, when you're not playing well enough, you've got to get rid of people.
Yeah, particularly against Ireland. And you've got to imagine that Ireland could win a shootout as well. You say that about New Zealand, but Ireland also have the weapons, don't they, to win a very high-scoring game against New Zealand. It's not as if New Zealand make it fast-flowing and turn the ball over a lot. They automatically win. Ireland can live with them at that level.
Yes, they can. I only talked about that as New Zealand's attacking side because that's where they are so good. So good. And it has to, if they get 4 turnovers, I think they're going to have to score 3 or 4 tries from them to win.
Yeah.
Ireland are a more complete team. I think Ireland are a team who have shown when they're not at their best, they can win. South Africa is a case in point.
Yeah.
Whereas New Zealand, under Foster, when they're not at their best, they lose. Therefore, you look at this match and say, okay, it's a quarterfinal, there could be pressure. What if neither of them are quite at their best? It loads in favour of Ireland. Ireland have got to be not at their best, and New Zealand have got to be right at their peak of the game. Yeah. If that happens, it's possible. But I'd make Ireland strong favourites on the back of the last 12 months and their World Cup form to win.
That must be right. Most important players, do you think, on the pitch, people to look out for?
Ardy Surveyor, because he's the talisman in the New Zealand team and in their back row. And as I said, it's in that back row area. New Zealand have got to find a way to turn this game around. And if they do win, you can't see anything but this bloke being the man of the match. For Ireland, God, it's very hard because they're such a brilliant collective organisation. I would probably say Jamison Gibson Park because he galvanises the pack to giving them quick ball. If they get quick ball, Sexton, who most people would say he's the key man. If Sexton gets quick ball, he's on the front foot, he's on the gain line, he's got runners from all angles. It's very hard to stop. So Gibson Park, because he'll release Sexton, he'll release Aki and the back three. Yeah, the former New Zealand scrum half, he's my man, Jamison Gibson Park.
That's a good one to have. By the way, what's it like facing a Haka? Is it what did you do when you faced him?
Well, in the early days, you were sort of told you had to respect it, which I think is a nonsense because it's a way that New Zealand galvanised themselves. And I can recall in 1991, David Campese, the arch maverick,
Yeah.
Campo turned around in the semi-final at Twickenham and started just lobbing a ball, sort of watching it going back and forward. He got terrible stick for disrespecting it, but he was absolutely right. And we then had that Richard Cockrell, your Leicester man moment.
One of my favourite players, Richard Cockrell. I absolutely love watching him play in the ABC club. But I really like that. He got stick for that as well. But it's a martial act, isn't it, the Haka? They're saying, we're tougher than you. I love the fact he walked up and got in their faces back. That felt reasonable to me.
Absolutely. He didn't lay hands on them. No, all credit to Richard Cockrell for doing that. There was, in fact, it shows respect to the statement that's being thrown down by the New Zealanders. But when Rugby was saying you must just sit there like 15 puddings and accept and start trembling and your muscles get cold while they're poking their tongue out and shouting loudly, that was such an advantage for New Zealand that it's wrong. And, it's great for the crowd, but you can't have international game of sport where one side gets a kick-off and they have a little advantage for 5 minutes over the others. That's wrong.
Did you feel they had an advantage when you played them? Did you feel that they had an advantage? They were going into it hot and you were going into it cold, effectively.
Yeah, and it built as well on that whole the Men in Black thing. It just built on it, and it's a little bit different now. I think the fact that under Foster they had a season where they lost so many games. Ireland beat them in a series there. Argentina won in New Zealand. They took that terrible hammering against Fiji. Let's not forget, France beat them with some degree of ease in this World Cup as well.
Exactly right.
So I think now that much as I love watching New Zealand play because of the technical skill and understanding they bring to the game, I think we're entering another era when the black shirt and the Haka isn't the formidable threat and psychological fear that it was for poor old sods like me who used to line up in white shirts against them.
I remember as a fan, but the thing is, you couldn't help but be excited by it as well. It was just a great visual thing, wasn't it?
Stig, the other thing is, in those days, New Zealand toured, so you would see them 4 times. They didn't have Rugby Championship live on television. So it was the other thing about it was a novelty. We all waited to see how big the Springboks were, but more than anything, we waited for the Haka and the black jersey. And whilst they've done wonderful things for rugby since the game has gone professional, from a New Zealand perspective now, we all know them. We know the Haka, the Haka. We know how they play. We're not scared of black anymore. It's a
bit like the Barbarians. I used to see them at Leicester on 4 days after Christmas. It was a massive occasion, and it was a chance to see a couple of players like David Campese played for the Barbarians. It was like, oh my God, seeing someone like him. There was always a Fijian or someone like that, a Frenchman throwing the ball around. It was mystery, wasn't it? There was a sense that you don't normally see these players that close, and it felt like an exciting, mysterious. I mean, it's a good thing that we see these players all the time, but it's a very different world we're living in now. The mystery's gone a little bit.
The mystery has gone. It feels it's that downside of being professional in whatever walk of life. In a way, you get more accomplished. People get used to you all the time. I guess it's like it's like live music. When you couldn't get hold of Bob Dylan and he was coming over to see you, all you had are the albums, but you couldn't get the bootleg series, and you just waited and waited and waited for him to come. You thought, wow. And now when he comes, I think, wow, still.
I bet you do. Well, let's not have a musical debate about Bob Dylan, Stuart. I'm not sure we can handle that. Let's move to Sunday.
Yeah.
First one up, you'll be there. England versus Fiji. Now, England go into this game just beating not a particularly accomplished Samoa team. Fiji going in, in a game which they had to get a point from. They did get a point from, but as we said, they lost to Portugal. There's the story about their player who lost their child. A lot of people felt Fiji would turn up much more to that game than they did. England have not been brilliant this tournament, though they have beaten Argentina. Fiji were really good. against Wales, but then have lost to Portugal. Who's the favourite now going into this?
England are the favourites. I find this one of the hardest ones to make out. It's really difficult. England were desperately poor against Samoa. It might be that they'd already topped the pool, so there wasn't the pressure. It didn't feel like that to me. It felt like England went out there with a full team, wanting to deliver a game to give them some confidence, and they didn't get it. We're hearing, as you and I speak now, that Marcus Smith is lined up to start at 15. I love that decision in some ways, because England lack a creative spirit. But in other ways, it strikes me as a desperate measure and not necessarily a well thought out one. So England are in a bad place at the moment, but so are Fiji. Fiji were very solid against Australia, but we now know that Australia were a poor team. Let's not forget Wales beat them 40 points to 6. And as Warren Gatland said after Wales had beaten Australia, he said everyone went on about Fiji being unlucky not to beat us. He said, but at 60 minutes, it was 36-14. We had complete control of the game. Yeah. And they did. And what Fiji did then for 20 minutes, they threw out the window all the talk about let's not give penalties away, let's minimise errors. They played like old Fiji. Now, those of us of an age know, one hand waving free, second rows doing amazing things. They did that, and they blew Wales off the park. And then we watched them against Georgia, and they tried to eliminate errors. After the match, they said we gave too many penalties away. They didn't say we lacked any vibrancy. Against Portugal, all the rugby just about was played by Portugal. Fiji are trying to become a European team. And I think by winning at Twickenham, it put something in their head that they can be like England and France. But to a certain extent, they don't want to be. They don't have a line out. So you can't play a foundational first phase game without a line out. No. You've got to do other things. And right now, I think Simon Raoului, they're very diplomatic and worldwide coach, has just got caught in a little bit of a trap. And I think Fiji have got to step back to being Fiji on Sunday if they're going to win. And conversely, Stig, and this is why I'm scratching my head about starting Marcus Smith, I think England have got to be more like England, which means keep the game slow, kick into territories. If England want to win the World Cup, they've got to do more than I am advocating now. But nothing they have done in this tournament suggests they're trying to do anything but win the next game. So I think if I'm putting my head into Borthwick's mind, and I think England need to play a controlled game and they need to take the sting out of it. Fiji need to do the exact opposite. Now, the question is, which one is going to do that? And I have no idea which way either of these teams is going to come out, which it goes back all the way to the start of this question. I find it very hard to work this match out, to get a hand. Like Ireland, New Zealand, I can get a handle on who will win and why. If this happens and that happens, I'm finding this very difficult.
To me, this has got a 15-7, 15-10 type feel of it, where England take their penalties, they get a drop goal, they're very disciplined. Fiji don't quite have it, and they lose to a team that's willing to take the points when they get the points. I think that seems to be a possible, for what you're saying as well. If Fiji don't come out and bring it, England can strangle them. And if they just take their points, I was looking through old quarterfinals, and quite a lot of quarterfinals are won by South Africa. Did it famously by getting drop goals. Get your points. Yeah. Just take your points as you go along. I just wonder whether Borthwick, who I know watched his teams quite a lot, he strikes me as someone who will just say, take your points, and that might be enough.
Well, that's interesting. Yanni de Beer famously in 1999 quarter-final against England, 5 drop goals. And then in 2007, when France played New Zealand had this multi-talented attacking team, and they lost because they refused to go for the drop goal. So what you're saying, I would completely endorse. England take their kicks. Fiji, by the way, will look to take their kicks because they're trying to be more European. But also, in the absence of Caleb Muntz, they've lost their best shaper of the game and kicker. Frank Lamani has been kicking quite well. He's been kicking his goals without striking them with any conviction, and you wouldn't say in a quarter-final you trust him as you would trust Owen Farrell. Which is why I'd say, it's where we started this and what you intimated about Fiji. If Fiji are going to win, they've got to find a way to get 3 tries, a conversion and a penalty. And then so England can't just march there with bang, 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 5-6 penalties. I agree. And I think that's the likeliest scenario, that England will do that.
Yeah, dare England to say to England, if you want to win this, you're going to have to score 25 points.
That would be a different scenario because England have no trust. They have no faith in their backline play. In that situation, that they're going to have to force a huge number of penalties from Fiji and kick balls into the corner and drive lineouts and go back to doing that. And that is a possibility as well. But, the Fiji scrum is a lot better than it used to be. So that won't buckle as it did. So that helps Fiji a little bit more. And Fiji's breakdown has also been so good that I don't think Mattia Reynal, the referee, will go into this game thinking, it's the smaller nation. They're the ones that go offside. They go off their feet. Yeah. They're desperate. And that's why Steve Borthwick has been making a point in the media about needing to know exactly how the breakdown's going to be organised. I'm not let anything out, but in the Times tomorrow, I basically said that Borthwick's intimation to Reino is, look, they're going over the top, beyond the ball, they're supporting it with their body, you've got to penalise them. It's the psychological side of trying to get in a ref's head. And Mathieu Reynal is one of the most delightfully independent-minded referees in the world. And he will referee it as he sees it. And at the moment, Fiji's breakdown has been better than England. So England don't get the penalties that way, which takes us all the way back, Stig, to you get 4 or 5, you take them, and Fiji, to beat them, have got to force them to get 7 or 8.
Yeah, interesting stuff. Now, that's enough about that game because it won't be the best game of the week, and almost certainly you never know in rugby. Exactly right. It could be an absolute corker. This one, I think, will be a thrilling spectacle. This one could be the cup final. They've already played, of course, France, South Africa. They've already played, but this could be a big one, couldn't it? France, South Africa. In France. This is probably the second and third best teams in the world playing in a quarter-final. It'll be a massive occasion, won't it? Home advantage would say France. South Africa will want to prove that they shouldn't have lost to Ireland, which is probably true. If they'd have kicked their kicks, they wouldn't have lost to Ireland. I thought they were the better team. I got a lot of stick for that, but I think they probably were on the day against Ireland. This is a huge match, isn't it? Where are you leading, Stuart?
Either of these teams could win the World Cup. There's no doubt at all. When I said there are 3 potentially great teams in this tournament, Ireland won. These are 2 of the other ones. I'm leaning towards France. I fancy France all tournament, even with the Willie won't he Dupont situation, and will he be the same player? Even there, I think France are built beautifully for this tournament. I think home advantage, if you look through, not many teams win the World Cup. Not a huge number have won it. But teams who should win it have won it, and 1 or 2 teams like South Africa in '95 who shouldn't have also won it. There's very few teams don't reach their maximum level of achievement when they're at home.
Yeah.
I think, back to England in 2015, we're not talking about just about anyone else, really. France in 2007 weren't a very good team. I was there when France beat New Zealand, and I've never known an atmosphere like it. And I know this is a bit left field, but when I was at home watching France versus Italy, France were leading 60 points to 0. They played some lovely rugby. Italy seemed to have scored a try. France then argued with the referee and said it wasn't a try. The referee, as unfortunately they all do then, bowed to player pressure. And the moment a 50-50 shot came onto view on the screen, 60,000 people, it was in Lyon, started going berserk. And I just thought, when we talk about home advantage, people just think it's not just being in your own country. It's having 60 million Frenchmen and having 80,000 at the ground going potty. And I don't think that very often the big decision changes the game from the referee. And I think referees get an excess amount of stick because normally the best team wins. But I think in a game like France v South Africa, it's not the big decision. It's the load of little ones that just turn it. And I think France-South Africa has potential to be very close. And if it's very close, it might be Dupont if he's at his best, but it might equally be refereeing, where South Africa afterwards will point at it and rightfully say, we feel as if we were robbed. And I'd say if this was in Johannesburg or Cape Town, I might be saying I'd fancy South Africa just for exactly the same reasons. Yeah. But, if you haven't been to Stade de France for this during this World Cup when France played, I think they only played the once, it blew me away. And I just think it's a massive advantage. And this is a team who will not panic because of the pressure, the expectations to do well. They're built for this. They've won their Grand Slams at home. They've beaten the All Blacks on the opening night. They know how to win without playing well. When they do play well, they can tear you to pieces. So I'm going France.
And the most important player on the pitch might be the referee, is a good way of thinking about it over the course of the game.
Wayne Barnes. This is the game where it could definitely... let's go for it. Referee is the key personality.
Yeah, so that's a really interesting point. And I think if you had a tenner to spare, Stuart, I don't know what odds you'd get. You'd probably get quite good accumulative odds here. If you said there's going to be a Northern Hemisphere shutout semi-final, which would mean Wales, Ireland, England, France all win, that's probably not a terrible bet to be making before the weekend.
I can tell you that an all European final is somewhere between 7-2 and 4-1. I did have a little look. I like to see how bookmakers think. They're very mathematical and different to those of us who used to play and write. So they're 4-1 on an Ireland-France final, and Wales are long odds-on favourites to win, and England are even longer odds-on favourites to win. So, they'd be about 5-1 on a European shutout. But that wouldn't be to say. I read in one paper yesterday, is this demise of the Southern Hemisphere? Be careful for what you wish. I don't think it is. I honestly think it's in Europe, and I don't think there's ever been a time when the European challenge has been so powerful in anywhere, let alone its own backyard. I just think Ireland and France are great teams.
Yeah, and also that's the point. This is not... If we were saying here, Wales, Ireland, England and France are all stonking teams, miles better than their Southern Hemisphere opponents, that's one thing. But Wales and England aren't as good as New Zealand and South Africa. And if the draw had gone in a different way, we wouldn't be expecting this. I mean, these are two brilliant European teams. That doesn't make the whole... Italy have been absolutely massacred by everybody in this tournament. Scotland were unlucky, but it's not been... I don't think you can point to the whole hemisphere, can you?
And then certainly not. I mean, you can say that New Zealand looked vulnerable, yet New Zealand could still end up... I can't see New Zealand being able to play two great games in a quarterfinal and a final to win. If they win the quarterfinal, they'll get to the final because, as you just said, they are better than England or Wales. I just think that South Africa, if it was in South Africa, they would probably shade it as my favourites to win it, and I'd be saying, but don't write off Ireland and France because they're great teams. I think where it is
Yeah.
is probably the most decisive thing. Three great teams, and it's not to denigrate the Springboks in any way.
No. Well, listen, if you fancy a flutter on an all hemisphere semi-finals, then let us know how you go on it. I think 5-1's not brilliant odds, actually. It's not great value there, but it might. I mean, it might be worth a punt.
I just think, Stig, that it could be so. Well, no, actually, if you think Ireland are going to win, and you're strong in that view,
Yeah.
England are 3-1 on, and there's a reason why they're strong favourites. Wales, I wouldn't put anyone off that. So you'd actually be saying you're talking about 5-1
On France beating South Africa.
On France beating South Africa. So I don't know if you and I mean, I wouldn't advocate anyone going and betting. We can't do that, but it does seem rather titillating.
Yeah. If you're titillated and you do it, you can let us know in the comments below how it goes for you. We'll be reviewing our betting tips and our rugby sense this time next week when we actually know what the semi-finals are. The main thing is it's going to be a great weekend of rugby. I'm sure you'll be watching it. I'm sure you'll enjoy it. And make sure you read about it in the Times. Stuart is bravely sacrificing his rugby soul by going off to watch Wales, Argentina and England, Fiji to report properly on it for the Times. There'll be great coverage of the whole raft of games all throughout the weekend and on Monday, of course, as well. Make sure you read that. And if you do like radio as well, listen to me and Asma Mir on Times Radio every morning on Monday to Thursday from 6 until 10. Thank you so much for joining us.